The signal came on a Tuesday morning, and it changed everything. Han Do-hyun was sitting alone in the control room of the Joje Deep Space Array when his screen lit up with something he had never seen before. He was 29 years old, thin, tired from a night shift, and drinking cold coffee from a paper cup. The array was a cluster of massive radio dishes on the southern coast of Korea, pointed at the stars, listening to nothing for years. That was his job, listening to nothing. But on that Tuesday, the nothing answered back. The signal was strong, stronger than anything natural. It pulsed in a rhythm that was too perfect, too even, too deliberate. Do-hyun set down his coffee and leaned forward. His hands were shaking. He ran the data through every filter he had. He checked for errors. He checked for satellites, for military tests, for anything that could explain it. The signal was coming from beyond the edge of the solar system, and it was not human. It took him 6 hours to decode the first layer. It took a global team of scientists another 2 weeks to decode the rest. When they finally understood the message, no one spoke for a long time. The message said, "Identify yourselves, submit your species index, comply, or be cataloged by force." It came from something called the Galactic Commons, a coalition of over 9,000 alien civilizations that controlled most of the known galaxy. They operated on a simple system. Every species was ranked. The older and more powerful you were, the higher you sat. The younger and weaker you were, the lower. And those at the bottom followed orders from those at the top. It was not a request. It was a rule. The world reacted the way the world always reacts, with panic, with anger, with confusion. Governments held emergency meetings behind closed doors. Religious leaders gave speeches that contradicted each other. Scientists argued on television. People marched in the streets, some holding signs that said, "Answer them," and others holding signs that said, "Stay quiet." The internet broke and rebuilt itself 3 times in a single week. In the middle of all this noise, 3 people sat in a small room in Geneva and tried to decide the fate of the human race. Yoon So-ha was the senior diplomat chosen to lead the newly formed United Earth Council. She was 51, sharp-eyed, and careful with every word she spoke. She had spent her career negotiating between nations that hated each other. Now she had to negotiate between humanity and the unknown. She sat at the head of the table and said very little, but when she spoke, everyone listened. Bae Jinu sat across from her. He was a retired naval officer, 60 years old, with a face like carved stone, and a mind that saw threats the way most people saw weather. He had read the decoded message 14 times. He did not believe it was a greeting. He believed it was a cage dressed up as a handshake. "They are not asking us to join them," he said. "They are asking us to kneel. There is a difference." And Do-hyun was there too, the young astronomer who had heard the signal first. He was not a politician or a soldier. He was just a man who had been listening to the sky when the sky talked back. But he understood something the others were still catching up to. He understood that the moment humanity answered, they could never take it back. Every word they sent would define them. Every silence would too. "If we answer now," Do-hyun said quietly, "we answer as we are. Small, divided, afraid. They will rank us at the bottom, and we will stay there. Maybe forever." So-ha looked at him. "And if we don't answer, then we buy time," Do-hyun said. "Time to become something else." It was the first time he had agreed with anyone in days. The debate lasted months. It spread from that small room in Geneva to every country, every city, every household on Earth. People argued at dinner tables and in classrooms and on trains. It was the first time in human history that every single person on the planet was asked the same question. Should we answer? The vote was held on a cold day in December. 7 billion people cast their choice. The result was closer than anyone expected, but it was clear. 58% voted for silence. Not everyone was happy. Some said it was cowardice. Some said it was arrogance. Some said it was the stupidest thing the human race had ever done. But the decision held, because for once, people understood something larger than their own opinions. They understood that speaking too soon could cost them everything. The United Earth Council ratified the Quiet Doctrine the following spring. It was the most important agreement in the history of the species. Every nation signed it. Every broadcast aimed at deep space was shut down. Every signal that could leak beyond the atmosphere was shielded or silenced. Earth, for the first time in a century of radio noise, went completely dark. They built listening stations in secret, buried under mountains, hidden in ocean trenches, tucked inside hollowed asteroids. They listened to everything. Every alien transmission, every commons broadcast, every whisper that crossed the void. They learned, they studied, they mapped the galaxy in silence, like a child pressing an ear to a locked door. The alien signal repeated every 11 years. Each time it came, the world held its breath. Each time, they said nothing. Do-hyun spent the rest of his life maintaining the array, listening. Soha guided the council through its first shaky decades. Jinu built the first classified defense research division, hidden so deep that only 12 people on Earth knew it existed. None of them would live to see what their silence would build. None of them needed to. They had made the choice, and the choice was enough. The galaxy thought Earth was empty. A dead rock circling a dull star, a failed signal, a species too primitive to respond. They were wrong. Earth was not silent because it had nothing to say. Earth was silent because it was getting ready. And when it was ready, the galaxy would hear something it had never heard before. But that was 250 years away. For now, there was only the quiet and the slow, patient work of becoming. 250 years is a long time to stay quiet. It is long enough for the people who made the decision to die, and for their children to die, and for their grandchildren to grow old and fade away. It is long enough for the reason behind the silence to become legend, and then tradition, and then something deeper than either. It becomes part of who you are. Kim Tae-won was born into that silence. He never knew the world before the Quiet Doctrine. His great-great-great-great-grandmother had voted in the original referendum, and the story had passed down through his family like a prayer. He grew up knowing that Earth was hiding, and that hiding was not weakness. It was the plan. By the time Tae-won was 40, he was the chief architect of the Undernet, the most secret construction project in human history. The Undernet was not one thing. It was everything. It was a web of research stations, shipyards, weapons laboratories, communication relays, and living colonies spread across the solar system and beyond. All of it invisible. Stations carved into asteroids. Factories buried beneath the ice of Europa. Entire cities built inside the hollow cores of dead moons, powered by energy systems that gave off no heat, no light, no signal. Nothing that could be detected. Tae-won stood in the command center of Station Goyang, hidden inside a slowly tumbling rock in the asteroid belt, and watched the progress reports scroll across his display. 14 new stealth cruisers completed this month. 2 more colony ships launched toward distant stars under total blackout. A new generation of sensor-absorbing hull plating, they called it ghost metal, had passed its final tests. The numbers were good. The numbers were always good, because failure was not something they could afford. He thought about his grandmother sometimes, how she used to tell him stories about the old world, the world before the silence. A world where people shouted into space without thinking, sending music and television and radio signals in every direction, like children throwing stones into a dark forest. She would shake her head and smile. "We were so loud," she would say. "We didn't know who was listening." Now they knew, and they had spent 2.5 centuries making sure that when the listeners finally came, humanity would be ready. Park Mireille was the reason they would be ready in time. She was a quantum physicist working in a laboratory on Titan, Saturn's largest moon. The lab was buried under 2 kilometers of frozen methane, staffed by a team of 40 researchers who had not seen sunlight in 6 years. Mireille did not mind. She had not become a physicist for the sunlight. She had become a physicist because the equations were beautiful, and because somewhere inside those equations was the answer to a question that had haunted humanity for generations: how to move faster than light without anyone knowing. The Galactic Commons used something called bridge transit for their faster-than-light travel. It was powerful, but messy. It tore holes in space that radiated energy in every direction, like a door being kicked open. Every species in the galaxy could detect a bridge transit event from hundreds of light years away. If humanity used the same method, their secrecy would be over in an instant. So Mireille found a different way. She called it fold space compression. Instead of tearing a hole, it folded space gently, like pressing 2 pages of a book together until they touched. A ship could slip from one point to another without any burst of energy, without any radiation, without any trace. It was silent travel, ghost travel, perfect for a species that had made silence its greatest weapon. When she ran the first successful test, a small probe folded across 40 light years and back in under an hour. She sat alone in her lab and cried. Not from joy, from the weight of it. She had just given humanity the ability to go anywhere in the galaxy without being seen. She knew it meant that one day the hiding would end, and everything she had built would be used. She hoped it would be used wisely. She was not sure it would be. Shin Unji did not have the luxury of doubt. She was the commander of the Black Veil Fleet, the largest and most secret military force ever assembled by any species. 3,000 warships, hidden in the permanent shadow of Jupiter, running on minimal power, crewed by men and women who had trained their entire lives for a single order that might never come. Unji was 53, lean, calm, and precise. She ran her fleet the way a surgeon runs an operating room. Every movement planned, every second accounted for, no wasted energy. Her crews drilled in silence. Their ships moved in silence. Even their communications were carried by tight beam lasers that dissipated into nothing after a few thousand kilometers. The galaxy could have looked directly at them and seen only empty space. She stood on the bridge of her flagship, the Goyo, and stared at the stars. Somewhere out there, the Galactic Commons was going about its business, ranking species, enforcing compliance, sending its fleets to strip resources from worlds it considered beneath its notice. They had sent scout probes toward Earth 6 times in the last century. Each time, Unji's people had intercepted and disabled the probes without leaving a single molecule of evidence. The Commons had marked Earth as a dead signal zone, a world not worth visiting. That was exactly what Unji wanted them to think. But the silence was getting harder to hold. Not because of any external threat, but because of the question that lived inside every human being who knew the truth. When do we stop hiding? Some people wanted to stay hidden forever. They argued that safety lay in invisibility, that the galaxy was too dangerous, that revealing themselves would only invite destruction. Others burned with the desire to step into the light, to show the universe what they had become, to claim their place. Taiwan believed in the plan. The plan said they would reveal themselves when they were strong enough that no one could push them back into the dark. They were almost there. A few more years, a few more ships, a few more colonies planted on worlds so far from the Commons that no one would ever find them. Mireille was less certain. She had given them the tools, but tools could be used for many things. She lay awake at night and wondered if she had built a shield or a sword, and whether it mattered. Unji did not wonder. She prepared. That was her job, and she was very good at it. But sometimes, In the quiet hours between shifts, she allowed herself to imagine what it would feel like to finally speak after 250 years of silence, to open a channel and let the galaxy hear a human voice. She imagined it would feel like breathing after being underwater for a very long time. The signal from the Galactic Commons came again, as it always did, pulsing through the dark. Identify yourselves. Submit. Comply. And once again, Earth said nothing. But in the shadows of Jupiter, 3,000 ships waited, and their crews smiled in the dark, because they knew something the galaxy did not. The silence was almost over. The Dahorin came on a Wednesday. 300 warships arranged in a perfect arrowhead formation, sliding into the solar system like a knife into still water. They were not worried. They were not even alert. As far as they knew, this system was dead. The Galactic Commons had marked it as a resource zone, unclaimed, unoccupied, free for harvest. The yellow star had useful planets. The gas giants had moons rich in rare metals. The asteroid belt was dense and profitable. It was, by Daharin standards, a good day for mining. Their fleet commander sent a standard notification to the Commons Registry. Daharin Mandate Resource Fleet entering Dead Signal Zone 7741, commencing survey and extraction. No resistance expected. He was wrong about that last part. Shin Unji stood on the bridge of the Goyo and watched the Daharin fleet on her display. She had been watching them for 11 days, ever since they crossed the outer boundary of the solar system. Her sensor operators had tracked every ship, cataloged every weapon system, mapped every communication frequency. She knew the name of the fleet commander. She knew the power output of his flagship. She knew that his rear formation was slightly loose on the left side, probably due to an older ship with engine trouble. She knew everything about them. They knew nothing about her. Unji was 61 now. Her hair was gray, cut short. Her uniform was plain. She wore no medals, no ribbons, no symbols of rank, except a single silver pin on her collar. A small circle with a line through it. The sign of the Quiet Doctrine. Every officer in the Black Veil fleet wore one. It meant, "We are the silence." She turned to her communications officer. Ojisek was 26, the youngest person on the bridge, with steady hands and a voice that carried well. He had been chosen for this assignment 3 years ago, trained specifically for the moment that was about to arrive. He did not fully understand why he had been chosen, until now, standing at his station, feeling the weight of it settle on his shoulders like snow. "The Council has confirmed the order," Unji said. Her voice was even, almost soft. "All fleet groups report ready. Decloaking sequence is authorized." Jacek swallowed. "Understood, Admiral." She looked at him for a moment. "You were born for this, Jacek. Every generation since the silence began has carried this moment forward. You are the one who gets to finish it." She paused. "Speak clearly." Across the solar system, 3,200 human warships received the same signal at the same instant. It was a single word, transmitted on a frequency that no alien sensor could detect, bounced through a network of hidden relay stations that stretched from Mercury to the Kuiper Belt. The word was, "Reveal." And then the silence broke. Ships rose out of the rings of Saturn, shedding ice and dust like old skin. They slid out from behind the moons of Jupiter, engines flaring to life in perfect unison. They emerged from inside asteroids that had been hollowed out decades ago, hatches opening for the first time, launching cruisers and destroyers and carriers into the black. They uncloaked above the plains of Mars, below the clouds of Venus, in the shadow of the moon. 3,200 ships, carriers, destroyers, stealth frigates, heavy cruisers, long-range interceptors. Every one of them wrapped in ghost metal, invisible until they chose not to be. Every one of them crewed by men and women who had spent their lives waiting for this exact second. The Duhoran fleet stopped. Not because they were ordered to, because they could not believe what they were seeing. One moment, their sensors showed empty space. The next moment, the space was full. Ships they could not identify, could not scan, could not lock weapons onto. Ships that had appeared from nothing, like ghosts made solid. The Duhoran fleet commander stared at his display and felt something he had not felt in 40 years of service. Fear. He opened a channel to his officers. All ships, hold position. Do not engage. I repeat, do not engage. His voice cracked on the last word. On the bridge of the Goyo, Unji nodded to Jisak. Open the channel. All frequencies. Every band the Commons uses. Jisak's fingers moved across his console. The channel opened. For the first time in 250 years, a human signal went out into the galaxy. Not a leak. Not an accident. A choice. Jisak spoke. His voice was calm, steady, and carried the weight of 10 generations. This is the United Earth Consensus. We received your signal 250 years ago. We chose not to answer, not because we had nothing to say, but because we were not finished becoming what we needed to be. We are finished now. You may leave our system in peace, or you may stay and learn what silence builds. The message traveled at faster than light speed through the Fold Space Relay network that humanity had secretly threaded across the galaxy over the past century. It reached the Galactic Commons headquarters in under an hour. It reached every member species within a day. 9,000 civilizations heard it. 9,000 civilizations tried to understand what it meant. The Duhoran fleet commander sat in his chair for a long time. His weapons officer asked for permission to raise shields. He shook his head. Against what? He said. We cannot even see them properly. We do not know what they are. We do not know how many more there are. He paused. We leave. Now. 300 Duhoran warships turned and left the solar system without firing a single shot. They moved quickly, and they did not look back. On Titan, Park Mireille sat in her laboratory, old now, her hands thin and spotted, and watched the data stream come in. She saw the Duhoran fleet retreating. She saw the Black Veil fleet holding position, weapons powered, but unused. She saw Jiseok's message echoing across the galaxy, growing louder with every relay it passed through. She closed her eyes and let out a breath she felt like she had been holding for 30 years. On the bridge of the Goyo, the crew was silent. No one cheered. No one shouted. They stood at their stations and looked at each other, and in their eyes was something that did not need words. 250 years of waiting, of building, of hiding, of passing the mission from parent to child like a sacred flame. And now it was done. The silence was over. Humanity had spoken. Unji stood at the center of the bridge, her hands clasped behind her back, and looked out at the stars. She thought about all the people who had carried this moment and never lived to see it. The astronomers, the diplomats, the soldiers, the scientists, the parents who told their children to be patient, that the time would come, that the quiet was not forever. She thought about Han Do-hyun, the man who heard the signal first. She thought about Yoon So-ha, who led the first council. She thought about Bae Jin-woo, who saw the trap before anyone else. She thought about them all, and she whispered something that no one else on the bridge could hear. We kept our promise. Outside, the stars burned on, and for the first time in 2.5 centuries, humanity burned with them. The galaxy did not know what to do with humanity. That was the problem. For 9,000 years, the Galactic Commons had operated on a simple principle. New species were found, evaluated, ranked, and placed in the hierarchy. The strong sat at the top. The weak sat at the bottom. Everyone knew their place. Everyone followed the rules. It was not fair, and it was not meant to be. It was order, and order had kept the galaxy from tearing itself apart. Then humanity appeared out of nowhere, and the order cracked. Within a week of Jiseok's message reaching the Commons, every council chamber, every diplomatic hall, Every military command center in the galaxy was asking the same questions. Who are these people? How did they hide for so long? How many ships do they have? How many worlds? What do they want? No one had answers, and that terrified them. No Ye-chan arrived at the Commons capital station 6 weeks after the reveal. He was 34 years old, tall, thin, with a gentle face and the kind of smile that made people trust him before he said a word. He wore a simple dark suit, no armor, no weapons, no escort of warships. He came alone, on a single ship, and docked at the visitor's port like a tourist. The Commons Council demanded a formal audience. Ye-chan accepted politely. He walked into the Great Hall, a chamber large enough to hold representatives of 9,000 species, with ceilings so high they vanished into artificial clouds, and he bowed. "Thank you for receiving me," he said. "My name is No Ye-chan. I speak for the United Earth Consensus." The Speaker of the Commons, an elder of a species that had held power for 6,000 years, looked down at him from a platform high above the floor. "You are a young species," the speaker said. "You hid from us. You refused the signal. You violated the protocols of first contact. You will explain yourself." "Of course. We received your signal 250 years ago. It told us to submit and be ranked. We studied your system. We studied your history. We found that species ranked at the bottom are used for labor, denied autonomy, and punished for disagreement. We decided that we did not want to be ranked, so we chose to wait until we were strong enough to say no." The hall erupted. Thousands of species shouting, clicking, vibrating, flashing colors in outrage or shock, or something in between. The speaker raised a limb for silence. "You will submit to ranking," the speaker said. "This is not optional." Ye-chan smiled. It was a kind smile, a patient smile, the kind of smile a teacher gives a student who has not yet understood the lesson. "No," he said, "we will not." What the Commons did not know, what they were only beginning to understand, was that Ye-chan was not bluffing. He was not negotiating from hope. He was negotiating from 250 years of intelligence. Behind him, in a secure room on his ship, Cho Hae-eun sat surrounded by screens. She was 57, quiet, and had spent the last 30 years of her life doing one thing: reading the galaxy's mail. Every Commons broadcast, every military transmission, every diplomatic cable, every trade agreement, humanity had intercepted and decoded them all. Hae-eun knew the internal politics of species that had never met a human. She knew which alliances were strong and which were held together by threats. She knew which elder species were feared and which were hated. She knew where the cracks were. And she fed everything to Ye-chan through a tiny device in his ear. "The speaker is bluffing," Hae-eun said calmly. "Their military alliance with the Dahoran collapsed 2 days ago. The Dahoran are too embarrassed by what happened in our solar system to support any action against us. Push harder." Ye-chan pushed harder. "I have a proposal," he said to the Great Hall. "Humanity does not want war. We do not want to destroy your system. We want to offer an alternative." He paused and let the silence do its work. He had learned that from the old stories. Silence was a tool, not an absence. "We will share our stealth technology and our fold space travel with any species that wishes to leave the Commons hierarchy and join a new coalition. A coalition of equals. No rankings, no forced labor, no punishment for disagreement. Free exchange of knowledge, resources, and culture." The hall went quiet, not the angry quiet of before, a different kind of quiet. The quiet of 1,000 species doing math in their heads, calculating what this offer meant for them. For the elder species at the top, the ones who had enjoyed power for millennia, it meant disaster. Their authority rested on controlling technology, controlling travel, controlling information. If humanity gave that away for free, the hierarchy would collapse. For the younger species at the bottom, the ones who had been ranked as lesser, used as labor, denied a voice, it meant something else entirely. It meant freedom. Within a day, 47 species formally expressed interest in Yechan's proposal. Within a week, 312. Within a month, over 800. The elder species panicked. They formed a military council. They drew up plans for a combined fleet to strike at Earth and destroy the threat before it grew. But their scouts came back with reports that stopped every plan cold. Human colonies had been found on worlds the commons had listed as uninhabited. Observation posts, tiny, silent, and visible, had been sitting inside common space for over a century. Human sensor networks threaded through regions the elders considered their private territory. Humanity had not just been hiding in one solar system. They had been everywhere, watching, learning, mapping every weakness. One scout commander submitted a report that was read aloud to the military council. It said, "We cannot determine the full extent of human expansion. Their colonies do not appear on any scanner. Their ships do not register on any sensor. We do not know how many there are. We do not know where they are. It is my professional recommendation that we do not engage a species we cannot see." The military council dissolved the same day. Yunji watched from Earth as the reports came in. She had transitioned from fleet admiral to a reluctant advisor, pulled into political meetings she did not want to attend, asked questions she did not want to answer. She missed the simplicity of command, the clean lines of a ship, the clear chain of orders. Politics was messy. It moved in circles instead of straight lines. But she understood why she was needed. The galaxy was afraid of humanity. And fear was dangerous. Someone had to show them that the fleet in the shadows of Jupiter was not a threat. It was a shield. She spoke at councils and said the same thing every time. We did not build our fleet to conquer. We built it so that no one could conquer us. There is a difference, and it matters. Some believed her, some did not. But the ones who mattered, the young species, the oppressed ones, the ones who had spent centuries being told they were lesser, they listened, and they came. Yechan worked 18 hours a day, drafting treaties, building frameworks, solving disputes between species that had never spoken to each other as equals before. It was messy and slow and exhausting. But every night before he slept, he read the same passage from the original Quiet Doctrine, the one ratified 250 years ago. It said, "We choose silence, not as an end, but as a beginning. When we speak again, we will speak not for ourselves alone, but for every voice that has been told it is too small to matter." He was keeping that promise now. One treaty at a time. One species at a time. One equal handshake at a time. The galaxy was shifting. Not because humanity had the biggest fleet or the most powerful weapons, but because they had offered something the galactic commons never had. 5 years after the reveal, the galaxy looked different. Not because the stars had moved or the borders had changed on every map, but because the way people thought about power had shifted, quietly and permanently, like a river finding a new path. The Open Accord was signed on a space station orbiting a neutral star, in a system that no species had claimed. 1,200 civilizations put their names to it. 1,200 species, many of whom had never been allowed to speak in the galactic commons, stood as equals and agreed to a simple set of rules. No rankings, no forced service, no punishment for disagreement, and free sharing of knowledge. It was not perfect. Nothing involving 1,200 different species could ever be perfect. But it was real, and it was theirs. No Yechan stood at the center of the signing ceremony and watched the representatives come forward one by one. Some were enormous, towering creatures with limbs like ancient trees. Some were small, no bigger than a human hand, floating in gravity-assisted pods. Some communicated through sound, others through light, others through chemical signals that required translators to interpret. They were all different. That was the point. Ye-chan's eyes were tired. He had not slept more than 4 hours a night in 3 years. His hair, once black, was now streaked with gray at the temples. His hands shook sometimes when he was not paying attention. But when the last signature was placed, and the hall filled with the sounds and lights and vibrations of 1,200 species celebrating at once, he allowed himself a small smile. He thought about Cho Hae-un, who was watching from a monitor room somewhere, probably already analyzing the political dynamics of the new coalition, already mapping the next set of problems. He thought about Eunji, who had declined to attend, saying she had done her part, and ceremonies made her uncomfortable. He thought about all the people whose names he would never know, the ones who had built and hidden and waited across 10 generations so that this moment could exist. 3 months after the signing, humanity opened its doors. Not all of them, not the military ones, not the intelligence networks, not the deep space sensor arrays, but the colonies. For the first time, alien ambassadors were invited to visit the worlds humanity had built in secret. Kim Tae-won was 78 years old when the first alien delegation arrived at Colony Dasan, a world orbiting a red dwarf star 47 light-years from Earth. He had retired from the Undernet a decade ago and spent his days in a garden he had planted himself, growing tomatoes and peonies, and a kind of alien fruit he had received as a gift from a species that had joined the Accord. It was quiet, and after a lifetime of building things in the dark, he had earned some quiet. The delegation came in a shuttle that landed softly on a field outside the colony's main settlement. Tae-won watched from his garden wall as they stepped out. 5 ambassadors from 5 different species, each one looking around with expressions that, despite their alien faces, were clearly astonishment. Colony Dasan was not what they expected. They had expected weapons, factories, military installations. They expected a fortress, a war machine, the kind of place a hidden empire would build. Instead, they found a town, a small, clean town with white buildings and curved roofs, surrounded by forests that had been carefully grown over a century. There were schools where children studied mathematics and music and biology. There were libraries filled with books in 12 languages. There were parks where families walked in the evening light of the red dwarf, the sky a permanent shade of soft amber. One of the ambassadors, a tall being with 4 arms and skin like polished wood, stopped in front of a mural painted on the side of a community hall. It showed a night sky full of stars, and beneath the stars, a group of people standing together, looking up. The ambassador stared at it for a long time. "This is what you built?" the ambassador asked. "While you were hiding, you built this?" Tae-won, who had come down from his garden to greet them, nodded. "We built many things. Ships, yes. Weapons, yes. But mostly we built places where people could live. That was always the purpose. Not the fighting, the living." The ambassador was quiet for a while. Then, in a voice that the translator rendered as barely above a whisper, the ambassador said, "We thought you were building an army. But an army is nothing without something worth protecting." The founding ceremony of the Open Accord was held the following week. Tae-won was asked to give a speech. He did not want to. He was a builder, not a speaker. But Ye-chan asked him personally, and Tae-won could not say no to a man who had bargained with 9,000 species on 4 hours of sleep. Tae-won stood before the assembly. He was old, and his voice was not strong, but the hall was silent, and every word carried. 250 years ago, he said, we received a message from the stars. It told us to identify ourselves, to submit, to be catalogued and ranked and placed in our proper position at the bottom of someone else's order. We chose not to answer. Not because we were afraid, although we were. Not because we were proud, although maybe we were that too. We chose silence because we believed that we could become something worth identifying, not a species that submitted, not a species that conquered, a species that met the universe as equals and offered something the universe had never been offered before. A hand, open, with nothing hidden in it. He paused. The silence was never emptiness. It was preparation. It was love for what we could become. The hall erupted. 1,200 species, in 1,200 different ways, expressed something that needed no translation. On Earth, Shin Unji sat on a bench outside her house, near the coast, listening to the waves. She was 66 and retired, and she spent most of her days reading and walking along the shore. She had turned down every medal, every title, every invitation to speak at ceremonies. She had done her job. That was enough. A shuttle landed in the field behind her house, and a figure stepped out. He was Duhorin, tall, gray-skinned, with deep-set eyes that reflected light like water. He was the same officer who had commanded the fleet that entered the solar system 5 years ago. He had requested permission to visit Earth. Unji had agreed because she was curious. He walked across the field and sat on the bench beside her. They looked at the ocean together. "I have one question," he said. "Ask it," she replied. "During the silence, all those years, were you afraid?" Unji thought about it. She thought about the long nights on the Goyo, drifting in the shadow of Jupiter, knowing that the galaxy did not know she existed. She thought about the weight of 3,000 ships under her command, ready for a war she prayed would never come. She thought about her crew, their faces in the dim light of the bridge, their trust, their patience, their quiet courage. "Every single day," she said. "But fear is not the same as weakness. We were afraid, and we built anyway." The Duhoran officer nodded slowly. They sat together and watched the waves. On Colony Dasan, in the amber light of the Red Dwarf, a girl named Yun Nara stood in her backyard and looked up. She was 9 years old, and until recently, the sky had been empty except for stars. But tonight it was full. Ships from 100 different species arriving in peace, their lights blinking against the dark like new constellations being born. She ran inside. "Mom, come look." Her mother came to the door. She was a teacher at the colony school, a descendant of the first generation that had chosen silence. She looked up at the sky and put her hand on her daughter's shoulder. "Were we always this brave?" Nara asked. Her mother smiled. It was the kind of smile that held 250 years of fear and hope and patience and love, all pressed down into a single quiet curve. "We learned." Above them, the lights kept coming one by one, filling the sky with proof that silence, held long enough and bravely enough, could build something the universe had never seen before. Not an empire, not a weapon, not a hierarchy. A home, with the door open and the lights on, waiting for anyone brave enough to walk in as an equal. And they came. From every corner of the galaxy they came. And humanity at last was not quiet anymore.